The focus of this year's forum is idea to impact. We all have ideas. Every one of us has ideas. We have ideas on how to improve things. We have ideas on how to achieve an existing goal. And sometimes we've got ideas on some things that are entirely new and no one's ever thought of. To launch this discussion, we've got 3 seasoned professionals, all successful researchers, but each has a different twist. One is an inventor, one is an innovator, and the third is an economic developer focused on improving the economy of our region in eastern North Carolina. Ted Morris is Associate Vice Chancellor for Innovation and Economic Development. Ted assumed his role as economic development here at ECU in 2007. He was well qualified when he arrived here. He had served in a variety of different roles, from Senior Economic Development Officer at North Carolina State University, where he was responsible for connecting faculty, staff, and students with business, government, and communities to foster economic growth. Prior to that, he gained valuable experience in the world of venture capital, investment capital, by investing financial resources in startup companies. Many of these startup companies came from the universities in the Triangle. Next, we have Sam Sears. He's Professor of Psychology, Director of Health Psychology Program here at ECU, and a 2013 recipient of the OMAX Gardner Award. Sam is described as a mentor, professor, psychologist, researcher, and advocate on the campus of ECU. He also arrived here in 2007, and since then he has proven time and time again to have each of these qualities, hence why he's earned the OMAX Gardner Award. This is the highest award awarded to any faculty member of the entire 17-campus system of the University of North Carolina, and it's bestowed by the Board of Governors. Sam came here from the University of Florida, where he gained his undergraduate and graduate degrees and began his professional career. Not only does he treat the patient in a face-to-face environment, but he's also developed a variety of technological tools to allow them to begin to manage their health. He does this by teaching them valuable coping skills. In addition, he's translated his unique experience into development of a mobile application that has been acquired by Medtronic. His research focuses in cardiac psychology, particularly treatment of patients with implantable cardiac defibrillators and those requiring cardiac rehabilitation. Sam is a seasoned industry-sponsored researcher. He's received nearly $600,000 as a lead principal investigator from industry and nonprofit sponsors. Our last speaker is Mike Van Scott, Professor of Physiology, Interim Associate Vice Chancellor of Research, and Chief Research Officer here at ECU. Mike has amassed a successful research career in the study of respiratory health. He earned his BS from Cornell, doctorate from West Virginia University, where he studied brown lung that is prevalently found among textile workers. He came to North Carolina as a postdoc at Chapel Hill, where he studied cystic fibrosis. On his arrival here at ECU, he shifted his focus to the study of allergy and asthma. His research is focused on the impacts of intrinsic factors on cardiopulmonary function and preclinical testing of novel therapeutics for the treatment of asthma, allergies, and respiratory depression. He is a researcher, inventor, collaborator, and recipient of the 5-year Research Award from ECU. Please join me in welcoming Ted, Mike, and Sam.
We are thrilled to be here with all of you and hope that this is one of many successful discussions in the future. As Marty said, our goal here today is probably to be a little provocative, certainly be informative, but also to have a constructive discussion with you all as we move forward around these topics. So, why are we here? Why innovation? Well, in my mind, you all as talented and inquisitive and creative faculty already have the answer. Without it, it's just too boring. right? That's not why you all get out of bed in the morning. It's not why we get out of bed in the morning. Change is inevitable, and that change is oftentimes labeled as innovation. You know, our purpose here today really is to think about, well, what does that imply then in a changing world as you navigate that balance of professional activities between research, teaching, outreach, all those things you're seeing in ECU's latest strategic plan as being very important to the institution. How does that translate down to you on a day-to-day basis? So if we make any contribution, I think we hope our discussion really is along those lines. Marty promised no white gloves today. And so I'll kind of kick that off. I'd say in most of my discussions with folks, you know, what makes times interesting now? Well, I think the contract that the public has with public universities has been renegotiated. And in many days, we just fail to forget that. It's already happened. It's not coming, it's already happened. What they expect from us, what they seek from us in terms of creating value, solving problems, contributing to society, they've already in their minds made up the answer, and I think we're starting to see some of the ramifications of that. You all certainly live out every day the general disintegration of traditional academic silos. We know now more than ever that our disciplines collide, they overlap, they start to merge and get really fuzzy around the edges. So again, I think our point here today is to talk about, you know, what is the nature of the evolving academic requirements? How do you remain competitive in an environment that's very dynamic in that regard? And how do you conduct your research, teaching, and outreach activities in ways that are mutually complementary, mutually reinforcing, so that the sum is greater than each of the parts? So with that, someone once told me it's always best to start with a conclusion. So before we let our speakers talk, I'll tell you I think what we all came to agree upon. At the end of the day, focus on the right things. And part of the key element in that is just getting out of our own ways, remembering it's not all about us. And if we can keep that in mind, generally those right things tend to come into focus. Don't be afraid to be different, and work very diligently to get that to that point of yes, as we would describe it. I know there are several key administrators, Mike himself, here in the room, and I think there's a general commitment amongst the leaders here at ECU to try and move that administrative culture rapidly towards how do we get to yes, rather than talking about barriers. So to all of you administrators here, thank you for those contributions. With that, enough for me. We have two very, very talented, accomplished, and well-respected individuals who really bookend a lot of the key points in this discussion, and I think offer us a chance to kind of peer over the horizon and have them report out on how things have evolved for them, and at times been messy, but at times been ground where great opportunities have come from. So welcome. Thank you. Glad to be with you. I'll just kind of walk us through, and we're not very rigid here in terms of how we want to do things. One of the key features of you that you all share, again, your bookends in many ways in terms of the type of work you're doing, and where it happens, how it happens, but certainly you share that common theme of interacting and collaborating in your research activities with external partners, be they industry, at times government, otherwise. Mike helps us with a lot of our military-related research as well. Talk to us a bit about that. How is that relevant? Is it becoming more relevant, and what are some of the things that's meant to you?
Yeah, so, I mean, the intrinsic question, I guess, is industry partnership compatible with academic success? And I would say that that's not even the question. The question is whether or not we can succeed academically without industry partnerships today. Mm-hmm. And for a couple of reasons. In NIH funding world, what's the average age for the first time NIH grant recipient? 43, 45, somewhere around there. So I think when Roz came in, when Dave Brown came in, we had discussions about how do you bridge that gap between the time when you start and when you get that first grant. And I think the answer to that, in my mind, was industry partnerships. The nice thing about funding from industry is it can come very quickly. You have to understand it can go away very quickly. But it's that quick nature that really gives the advantage. You know, NIH takes so long, federal funding of any sort takes so long to position yourself and to get, that you need something to bridge that gap. And that's how I got into it early on, is that I got to a place where I was on a hiatus between NIH grants. And I needed something to keep my lab busy. So somebody approached me about doing work with non-human primates, with monkeys. And we developed our models in mice, and they came and asked, would you be willing to try this in monkeys? And I said, sure. So I went up to the chairman's office. I sat down with Bob Luss and said, I just have this opportunity to start this work in monkeys. He says, you ever worked with a monkey? I said, no. He says, well, how are you going to take it when they reach out and, slap you? So I guess the same way I take it when a student reaches out and slaps me. So the point is that it immediately started a funding stream, right? And we were able to build from there and to use those monies, to kind of bridge the gap. And it's led to a whole lot more, and we'll go into that a little bit later.
Well, I like the way that you described us as having bookends, because I think that probably does provide a good point-counterpoint. I'm a scientist practitioner. I'm a clinical psychologist that functions in cardiology, so I take care of the psychologic side of living with heart disease. So on my daily basis, I see patients dealing with various problems, whether those be problems with medications, problems with the device, or problems with the disease, somehow in which the human person, the human factor of the disease, is trying to interact with these different technologies. So I identify problems on a regular basis, one patient at a time, if you will. But as a clinician, you see the same problem repeatedly. You start to say, is this a systemic problem? And if it is a systemic problem, let's say in the case of my work with implantable defibrillators, where patients need a device to identify and treat potentially life-threatening arrhythmias, but it does so with high-energy shock. So repeatedly, I see patients showing up looking terribly anxious after having received high-energy shocks from almost dying, and you say to yourself, this is a problem that I think other people probably care about, like maybe the people who make this device. And so you say to yourself, wait, I mean, I don't necessarily care to work or not work with industry, but I don't want to see any more human suffering that, frankly, I can look upstream and see where it's going to occur. Like, that's my job, is to forecast problems and come up with solutions for them. In short, novel technologies create novel problems. Even if they're a solution to a problem, they often have collateral new problems. And so innovation by itself within industry often creates a set of additional, call them problems, call them opportunities, call them puzzles. But that's how I started on this, was simply a shared desire to see better outcomes, reduce human suffering. Every one of us do that naturally. We don't go, I need to go find an industry partner. We say, I want to solve that problem. I want people to be able to encounter diseases, manage the disease, and be able to still do everything they always wanted to do. That's great care then. And so I was drawn to working with industry only because they shared the same passion to try to solve the problem. Now you could say, they got different motives than you. Better be careful, naive ivory tower professor. But actually, most of the time, they share the same goodwill. I mean, there maybe Wall Street worries about the nitty-gritty, but the people who are working in these companies trying to solve problems, they usually share the universal ideals of creating something that makes a difference for people. And when you can do that, when you can find a shared goal with industry that is also a shared clinical goal in my case, then you have a perfect kind of synergy.
So the one thing that I think you have to be careful of is that the goal is probably the ultimate goal is going to be the same. But oftentimes we academics want to stay on a problem until we solve it. We want to understand it completely. Industry wants to get to a go, no-go answer
Yeah.
and then move on. And that's the hard part for academics, I think. But I think I know Sam is right. In the end, you're both trying to get to the same place, and that is you're trying to get to ultimately to an answer to the problem. Our tendency is just to keep digging deeper and deeper and deeper until we understand it enough to bring up that answer. Theirs is more ping-pong-like in that we'll try this, get enough data to know whether this is the right direction. If it's not, let's try something else. And that's a little hard to get used to.
I actually think that that's a neat thing about working with industry because it does make you more practical. You talked earlier about the speed, I call it the speed of business. You know, the speed of NIH is, well, I'll submit this grant and I'll hear back in 9 months. The speed of business is you can get your idea in the right place with the right people. They'll make a go, no-go decision on it in a short period of time. And so you kind of know, is that an avenue that at least industry thinks they're going? Because they're playing the same game you are. They're forecasting where do they think the market will go? What are the important solutions or products that patients, in the case of my work, will need? So we're both trying to forecast similar kinds of things. They're looking at disease trends, they're looking at epidemiology data, they're looking at all kinds of similar kinds of things. They do have different motives. I'm not trying to make them sound exactly the same. But interestingly, often we share more of the synergy than you would think. As long as we move beyond where I think some of the introductory comments were, Mike, about, hey, you got to have NIH grants or you're not an academic star. As long as we defeat that hypothesis and then say, you're an academic star when you solve problems. That's what you are. You solve problems. And that doesn't matter what discipline you're from or whether you went to a fancy school or not. It's about whether or not you solve problems. Can you create utility or value in your work? And honestly, that can be hard to do for academics sometimes because we are dealing with often very pieces of the problem. We often don't have the big picture marketable outcome of research. Sometimes it's just some of the more elementary key elements that we can understand.
But the currencies can be very different.
Yes.
Right? So our currency is publications, grants, grant dollars, whatever, right? But publications is are key to us. And I have yet to find a company that is not interested in publishing. That seems to be a fallacy that people
I agree 100%.
Bring forward about industry. It's not true. They may not be willing to support a study long enough to get enough data to where we think it's worthy of a publication. That's a real concern. Right? So you'll end up doing a lot more abstracts and meeting presentations than you do publications out of industry work oftentimes. So I don't find industry work all the time to be good places for students to be working. It's good experience for them to be involved, but it's unlikely that those projects are going to be good for dissertations or theses.
So I want to drill down on that topic a bit because what you started out by describing was that this collaboration, and when we say industry, we're taking a very broad definition. It might be industry, it might be government agencies, it might be military partners, it might be community groups for many of our folks. Sure. But it's given you flexibility, right? It's allowed you to do things sooner or in a different way. Sam, you've talked a lot about the point that there is shared mission there. So in effect, what you're saying is you get friends with horsepower that come into the equation. But to Mike's point, this idea of different currencies, we all have our yardsticks, and again, as I tried to allude to in my opening comments, maybe some of that yardstick for those of us inside the university is shifting a bit, but talk about some of the practical, day-to-day managerial, operational challenges, and I think your transition there with the currency is a big part of that, sure. That you've had to deal with to keep a foot in each camp as a boundary spanning person in these realms.
So let's start with budgets, right? Because that's where really the rubber meets the road. Mm-hmm. If you're going to do work with industry and your students can't get publications from that work, then you need to add something into that budget so that you can support them to do other projects. So when we started, we incorporated a 15% academic program fee in everything we did. It went right on the top. And I never had an industry that questioned that fee. We just explained to them that, why we needed it. We're an academic institution, and they've supported us on that. Now, recognizing that we were able to do the work, ultimately, it cost them less to do the work with us anyway.
Right.
So they didn't mind paying that. But that was key. And then we were allowed to accumulate those funds and support our graduate students with those funds. And so that was new to the university. They'd never seen that. They didn't know how to deal with it. But that's where you just keep working until you get the answer yes, right? Don't tell my people I said.
And I think one of the stories you shared as we thought about this event was a similar point on FNA as well. That ultimately it's still a cheaper project than they could get it done anywhere else.
It is, and I think what we need to understand about industry and academics is we look at indirect costs and F&A costs differently. So when industry sees a 47.5% F&A rate, they immediately think profit. That's not what it is. That's all of our infrastructure that we've invested in, right? And so it really is, and people that have worked with us at OSP on industry contracts know they'll get tired of hearing this, but we just don't, and we don't talk about F&A with industry. It's a fully loaded contract. This is the cost this is what it's going to cost you to do the work. How we spend that money internally is our business. All you need to know is how much is it going to cost you? And they're good with that, typically. Sometimes they want to drill down. Anyway.
Well, I like the idea of different coins of the realm or currency. I really don't, for my lab and our work, it's not, we don't want to get involved unless we know that we're going to be able to complete work that gets toward publication. That's where one of the things our experiences have been different, because I'm working really almost post-market. You're really working pre-market. Yeah, that's right. And so in the post-market world, we want to get involved because we can publish the work and we can do it in larger scale or again, friends with power, I think you said. I want to make sure I didn't say friends with benefits, but you know, friends with power. But you know, I think the idea here is that we want to get involved when the currency is publications and when the amount of support is in buckets closer to assistantships. Essentially, keeping the lights on in my lab and students in there to work is one of the initiatives. So sometimes it's almost like a cash flow thing, right? This just keeps my lab moving while we go and work on other things that might even be higher yield, but we got to get these students and the lab has to stay open for me to be able to pursue the next bigger pot. So I think that you alluded to that earlier in your comments, Mike, and I think it's another good way to think about this.
Well, to that point, what percentage of your time do you feel like in your current activities do you spend on that business operational role? I mean, the reality is you've just described what an entrepreneur has to do, right? Yeah. You've got to be prepared to walk away from clients you don't want.
Yeah.
Many times, I think both of you probably have experienced as we have, those clients come back. Yeah. And then it's a much better situation. But you know, in effect, you're running a business enterprise.
Yes. And I think that's the challenge that often it's hard to explain to a community member. You say, you know, why do you have to think about, why do you have to interact and consult and deal with these different companies and businesses? Because I guess they think that like graduate student costs and lab costs are all just somehow paid for. But I mean, at any given time, I may have 3 to 5 doctoral students that have stipends and costs associated with them and more. And so we have to be successful continuously, and not just here and there. We've got to be successful continuously to be able to continue to provide that kind of academic leadership and products that demonstrate, hey, we are the go-to, we're the go-to lab if you want to answer questions that relate to human factors and devices.
So there's a perfect segue there. You're having to commit time to those type of entrepreneurial, business operation type concerns. Certainly that comes at a cost, right? I mean, that's time and effort. When you flip this all around and look from the other direction, how do you feel that those activities ultimately, you know, the conducting of your teaching, your research, your outreach, your partnerships, when all those come together and they come together well, where do you find the magnification? Oh yeah, I think back to my...
Let me back up just a little bit and address this timing issue. I think one thing you've got, again, it's a difference between industry and academics.
Agree.
And that is, typically industry does not ask twice. If they want something, they're going to ask you for something, and if you don't respond, they're going to go find it somewhere else. And we're not used to that, right? So one of the biggest time commitments that I have with industry is just being there to answer their question when it's asked, and to get them what they need. Right? You have to respond quickly. And that's been a difficult thing for this university to do, is to move things through fast enough. Right? I mean,
Well,
we're on camera, so I can't give you the example. but that's important, right? And if you're going to go into this sort of work, you really do have to have the mindset that they come first. You have to do all your other duties and get those done. But when that partner calls, you've got to find a way to respond. Now, to get back to this other point that you're making, where do you find that amplification? Where I find it, and Sam touched on this, is what I found is that I brought a certain expertise to the conversation. But I was invited into the boardrooms to defend that little data set. And as I sat there, I got to listen to all of these other people that were working, right, in the same project. And you're sitting next to, you know, clinicians from Harvard that did the clinical piece, and, you know, the guys that did the toxicology from Singapore, and, you know, everywhere around the world. And you start to really put your work into the context of something much larger. And it made me a much better teacher. I mean, I could now talk to the medical students really understanding the complexities that they were going to deal with.
I think it's a brilliant point. You know, in many of those boardrooms, these are some of the best engineers in the world that we're sitting down with. I mean, they go after the top people in the world to figure out how to make pacemakers and defibrillators and stents better, stronger, faster, different. And sitting down with them makes you better. Now, in regard to that sort of wrapping it all up, well, to me, that's the definition of the best training possible. Because when you're training a student, you have a graduate student, you're really preparing them for a marketplace 1 to 5 years out. So if you're working on yesterday's problems, it's 5 years yesterday by the time they're out. So the kinds of challenges that business brings us are challenges that are current, right now, hot. And so it's a real-time market sensitivity if you're working on problems that industry's dealing with, so that when our trainees come out, even if they go into academia, which hopefully many do, or they go into industry, either way they win by that sort of real-time, this is the problem that people are having right now. To me, that's the real deal training. That's not a bunch of yellowed lecture sheets that nobody cares about that you could read about in the book. That's like, boom, we're solving problems now. We're making a difference that people care about now. It's useful professorship, not necessarily you know, the best textbook conversations. It's about, hey, I don't know the answer to this. The best part of it all to me is everything they bring me is a pretty novel problem. You can't get a textbook on this problem. It's never been done before. So that's the best part, and I think that's what we want to train our students to do. The problems that we can train our students on now, they're solved. It's the next set that we say, novel problem, how do you deal with that?
I want to go to several of your points, but before I want to touch on one of Mike's. I mean, it was as recently as yesterday when we heard the provost say, I think at least 3 times in the space of 10 minutes, that, you know, his vision is for us academically and from a research perspective as a campus to be 2 things: responsive and accessible.
Yep.
And that's exactly what it comes down to. And, you know, that's not a very complicated formula. Accessible and responsive. That's what most people call customer service. Right? It's what we all expect, no matter where we go for what we need. I want to go to Sam's point, which is an excellent point, and it is this idea that there is, you know, a rapid erosion of competitiveness. It doesn't matter whether you're an entrepreneur or a terrorist, right? Everybody's innovating very, very quickly, and folks need to build resumes that are timely and current, which is one of the great points you make. A number of us here in the room do a lot of work throughout the region on supporting the very front end of this pipeline. working with our K-12 students as they continue to learn and grow in a world where the ability to create and produce is becoming rapidly democratized. Whether it's the software tools, the hardware tools like 3D printing, the fact that our K-12 teachers are reversing the classroom, the fact that many times a lot of our K-12 teachers have more industry interaction than a lot of university faculty do. I think puts us in a very unique juncture here. I mean, we know, I see it every day as an economic developer, industry's pushing on the university. Your graduates are not ready, right? The university's pushing down on K-12. Your graduates aren't ready, and when we get them, we can't do enough with them, and then industry's not happy. How do you see this being driven in the future? And I agree with everything Sam said about why that works and why that's productive. But what are you seeing in the new students coming up to you? Are you starting to see evidence that they're coming with a problem-solving mindset and that they're going to be looking for universities where they get to get their hands dirty doing that?
Well, I don't know that I see it as much because I deal mostly with doctoral students, but I can tell you East Carolina is a place that we don't think we have all the answers. We're not sitting resting on some great 500-year history about our ivory towers. This is a place that we're nimble, we're younger, I think we're hungrier, I think we're humble. Those are the things that'll make this university great. We're not going to sit back and talk about the old days because we need to make the new days now. And that's what's great about this place because we can do it here. There's no reason East Carolina can't be the place that's going to solve the new problems. Because I think if we continue to recruit the right kind of faculty, and I think the students coming up come here because they like the little scrappy, they like the underdog that maybe not everybody went, ooh, you're going there? No, you're going to East Carolina. It's a great place. It's a place focused on doing the right stuff. Hey, those are the kinds of students I think we're getting here, and if our faculty continue to demonstrate that same kind of spirit about solving problems and creating a useful intellectual environment, then we're going to be a great place. I think we got a chance to be a really special place for a long time to come.
I agree.
So this is about ideas to impact, right? And I think there's another misconception is when you talk about innovation, that you've got to be that one with the tremendously new, exciting idea or approach. And I think we need to get away from that. There are people with that skill set, right? But to get that idea to impact, you have to have people that can come in and really test it and do it really well and make that decision on whether to move it forward or not. And clearly that's where I've worked. In fact, as we were doing the introductions here and you heard about the inventor and the innovator and the economic developer, I really wondered where I fit. Because I don't consider myself to be an inventor and I don't consider myself to be an innovator. Right? But what I do really well is I work with people. I use my skill set to basically advance the entire program. And so I think what we need to do with our students is we need to get them thinking, certainly, but we also need to get them to recognize what their true strengths are and where they fit in the team. And then to plug in and become part of that team.
I agree.
Because that big idea goes nowhere if you can't actually test it.
I think it's a great point, Mike, because if you sit around waiting for some big-time idea, you're going to wait unless you're somebody really, really special. Most of the time, good ideas come from trying to solve problems and innovating around a need, right? It's a mother of necessity idea, or invention's the mother of whatever that is. But consistently, the deal is innovation comes because you're trying to solve a problem. And I would get away from the idea that somehow great talent gets all these great things. Rather, persistent, committed, passionate, searching and working on problems. That's how you get to these kinds of innovations that make an impact. It's just not this bolt of lightning of an idea most of the time, from my standpoint. And I think it's really important we emphasize that because it's intimidating to say, well, I just don't have any great ideas, so I don't know what I would do.
Well, I like what's implied by both of what you've said, which is that by definition, innovation requires implementation. It is an action-oriented thing. It is far beyond discovery. And it comes through, you know, like you said, the grit and perseverance. I know you want to add a point to that. But part of our discussion that we had, again, in preparing was, where do we fall within the university system here in North Carolina as ECU? I mean, Sam pointed it out. It's a great place with a great scrappy work ethic, a little bit of grit. You can come here and get dirty and try and solve real world problems because of the needs of the region and the faith that the region has in us. But, you know, in terms of the setup, are we better positioned here at ECU to be able to do some of that type of work in terms of how we're engaged, how the university functions, that maybe some of our competitors who we oftentimes say, well, we're not going to get to be one of those. But I think what you're talking about is, let's not hold our aspirations back.
Yeah. Mike, I think East Carolina's really trying to reduce barriers. No one's ever said, well, you just can't do that because you might be successful. Usually people say, hey, what can we do to work together on this? It's just the spirit here is different. Mm-hmm. You know, bringing some big attitude into this part of North Carolina doesn't work. That's one of the reasons people that come here stay here, because they see themselves as part of a collaborative team, if you will, or a collaborative experience. I mean, we do see ourselves as a community. We do see ourselves as, you know, people say town and gown. It's all the same here.
Yeah.
We're all together here. So I think those are strengths. I don't know, maybe Mike could talk more formally about structures in terms of East Carolina's infrastructure and things, but at least from a spirit standpoint, the esprit de corps is very positive toward innovating and solving problems. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's funny that we were talking about structure in a forum on innovation. You know, I don't think there's any innovator in the world that would let structure stop them. Mm-hmm. Right? You figure out the system you're working in, and you figure out how to do what you need to do, right? And sure, can we have a more efficient system? Absolutely. Should we work for that? Absolutely. Don't let it stop you. Mm-hmm. You know,
use it to your advantage.
Move on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, harkening back to one of my points, our goal here today is really to talk about impact, and as both of you had alluded, impact comes through scaling, right? And scaling doesn't happen alone. Scaling happens when you're part of a team with a bigger vision. You bring those friends with extra horsepower to the table. You're all simultaneously focused on the people that have the need and how best to solve it. Both of you have had, again, back to the bookends, different experiences on how you've scaled your innovations and scaled them to maximize their impact. Mike, you've been involved in clinical trials and increasing that body of work at the university. Sam, you've been involved in some entrepreneurial startup type activities and so forth. Share with us some experiences from that scaling to impact piece of the puzzle.
That's the scariest part to me, because you're building an enterprise that requires a constant amount of funding, mm-hmm. right? And you lose the funding, you lose your people, you just have to start all over again. Mm-hmm. So the first thing that we did was we convinced the chair, Bob Lust, that we needed a bank account, and he needed to allow us to take whatever residuals we had from our activity, and we needed to be able to save it. And he said, well, how much do you think you need? And I said, $500,000. And he said, you're kidding me. I said, no. I've got animals that cost, you know, $10, $15 a day to keep, and I've got 75 of them. And my whole program falls apart if I have to get rid of them. And so I need enough to keep those animals for 1 or 2 years if I go into hiatus, and I need to be able to keep my people. So he said, okay. And so we fought every year for that F&A account and to keep that. And then in 2007, 2008, you know, the economy fell, things started to slow down, and we burned through that money before the contracts came back. But we didn't lose. We didn't stop. So that's the scalability is hard, because you don't want to overbuild and not be able to support it. So you really do have to think, and that's in a state system, this is not what they think like, right? Because it's a year-to-year budget. And they want all that money to go away at the end of the year. And so that is the hard part in this system.
Yeah.
But you can do it.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that is scary. Our situation's a little different. Since I kept seeing the same problem over and over, patients encountering arrhythmias, getting high energy shocks, presenting with anxiety disorders and all kinds of other problems of life, if you will. So we got American Heart Association funding and tested the efficacy of an intervention. Teach patients about how to understand what's happening, teach them how to re-engage, tolerate their heart rate again, because that's associated with a concern that they might get shocked. So we could test that, and we did that in clinical trials and published that. But then I had this idea, right? There's about 1 million people with ICDs in the world, implantable defibrillators. There's 1 million people out there. I'm a professor sitting here with this intervention that could probably make a difference for a lot of people. How do I get it to all those people? There's not psychologists out there that I can go teach and train to do this. We're one of the few places in the world that has an integrated clinic. So I have this thing that works and 1 million people that need it. There's no other way to get there except industry. I mean, it's sort of like Jonas Salk having a vaccine. Well, they can't make those on the campus. So I had this thing we had to do. So that led us to ways in which we could scale it with industry. But the problem is, one challenge we had with industry was that only one company will come forward and say, we want to help you, we'll get you, but then you can't work with our competitors. Well, why don't do that either? So we could get the next sort of batch, if you will, of patients affected by the intervention, the strategies and things. We could do some with the company, but ultimately we had to innovate even bigger to do that, and that's where the mobile phone app came from, which allowed us then to offer what we do across all patients, regardless of manufacturer, and break the bonds of sort of exclusiveness. But it was simply, again, trying to do the right thing. To me, industry was just part of us trying to do the right thing. And you go, what? That's kind of naive or ideal. Yeah, I know. I'm a professor. That's what I do, right? I'm not a business person. That's not what I want to do. I want to solve problems that affect human beings. And so the app, it wasn't like we set out to do an app. I don't have any interest in apps. I don't even know how they work. I have a company that makes them. I don't even know what they are. I don't have anything. They solve a problem. They're a tool. That's what they are. And I hope you laugh at that, because part of what I want you to see in my communication about that is you stay committed to what matters. And the business stuff will come around you. There are people that have those skills. People like you, Ted, who could come to me and say, well, I need to understand the market, and I need to understand the market demographics and the potential for sales, and how do we scale this thing, and how much would it produce, and what are the legal costs, and all those things. Those aren't the things that I know about. Some days I'm pretty sure I don't know about it when I look at how some of the business is running. But the idea here is that we stay focused on the right stuff. And when you do that, you can walk away proud of what you've done. You made no sacrifices on what you care about. Instead, you make sacrifices on the right things, and you keep your soul intact. And to me, that's been fun. It's been fun to kind of say, hey, we're making a difference, and we didn't have to make compromises that somehow made us feel uncomfortable, or like we sold out. Rather, they bought in, and I think that feels different.
Both of you have brought us around very well back to our original conclusions up front. And to Sam's point, being there focused on the right things. Remember, it's more about you, others than you. We've already talked about getting to yes. I think we would say to that fourth one, don't be afraid to be different. That we would readily agree, but I want to cover a few others that you may have thought of before we turn it over to Q&A, because it's about that time. From my perspective, one of the keys is keep in mind the difference between risk aversion and risk management. I mean, there is an incredible gulf and distance between those two things, especially when risk management is done well. It involves risk recognition, but it really stomps a lot of aversion out. along the way to getting to good management. So I think the punchline there under be different, don't be afraid to be different, is don't be afraid to fail. I mean, you mentioned it, you weren't afraid to fail. If we burn all this money and we got to sell the monkeys, it could happen. I'm not sure where you sell those monkeys, but that's a whole topic for the next workshop.
They're retired.
There you
actually.
go.
I have to
So you
retire
got a home
them.
for them. Beautiful.
Yep, they retired before I did.
There you go. So, you know, but can we agree to that? Don't be afraid to fail. It's just going to happen from time to time, especially when you're trying to take an enterprise and scale up and drop back and scale up a little more and drop back. I mean, that's life. 2 steps forward and maybe 3 to 5 back. But what others would you all like to share before we turn it over to Q&A?
I think the one that you mentioned, you know, don't be afraid to be different, I think is key. I can't tell you how many times in a conversation with sponsored programs or grants and contracts, they said, oh, Dr. Van Scott's a different case. You know, and I mean, that was strange to me because anybody could have done what I was doing. I wasn't a different case. Mm-hmm. I just didn't accept when they told me that I had to charge indirects on a monkey. I didn't accept that. If a monkey cost me $1,500 or $2,000 and a guy's pH meter only costs $1,000 and he got to count that as equipment, why didn't I get to count my monkey as equipment? Mm-hmm. And so every time I went back with those sorts of arguments and won, mm-hmm. I became more different. Don't be afraid to be different.
I think those are great points as well. I don't think I do anything all that unusual. I'm just trying to solve the problems that are faced with every day. This is sort of a lot of hullabaloo about doing my job. This is what I'm supposed to do. Mm-hmm. I'm supposed to solve problems that matter. And when I solve those problems, I document those via publications. Mm-hmm. And when I do those things, that's my job. You know, I think being hungry and humble are the things that I stick with. Just, you know, loving what I do and being hungry to do more of it, not being satisfied just because we got some of the way. And, you know, Mike alluded to a number of these characteristics. There are a lot of ways to sort of touch on them, but I also know that we're not half the way I want to get yet. So that's the sort of hungry and humble part. I just think that the life of a professor trying to solve problems is a very satisfying one personally. And all this stuff can just sound so overwhelming or intimidating or foreign to us as academics, but it really isn't. And I find it to be very satisfying. I love what I do. I just can't imagine not doing what I do. I love this work. I think it's great to be able to do both science and practice and teach. Just call it all service if you want, but I think this is an amazing opportunity. So impact, innovation to impact really has to do with making a difference on all those activities.
And in the end, I think, you know, getting back to that, stay focused on what's important to you. And so for me, I just like to work, you know, I like the work that I do. But ultimately, it comes down to that one problem that I was working on 20 years ago, and that is asthma. You know, with as smart as we are and everything that we've done, we have yet to find a cure for asthma, or even a really effective long-term treatment for asthma. And that's what really makes this work worthwhile, is because these companies are bringing in novel ideas on how we might do that, and I get to test it. Mm-hmm. And you know, one of our best successes was back in about 2005, I guess, 2006, there was a protein that came out of, a chimeric protein that came out of UCLA, and it was supposed to shut down mast cell secretions. And we tested it, and it knocked out the asthma in our animals. But it also had significant toxicological effects. And that compound was due to go into kids the end of that year. And Biogenetic, that was the one with Biogenetic, and they returned the IP back to UCLA. Well, another company has picked that up, reformulated it, and that company came back to us last year to retest that compound. And more on that in another year. But
We look
that's
forward
what
to it.
drives me, because if that
That's a great
works,
point.
if that works, that's significant.
Well,
And that's a
absolutely.
career worth, working at.
Absolutely.
And return customers really saying that you did high quality, ethical,
Yeah.
productive work. I think that's great. And I think that's one of the things about working with the industry. If you do it well, you get rewarded too, because they want to come back and work with you. And that's intellectually the best.
And Biogenetic, flatly said, you just saved us $15 million.
That's right. The no-go decision was big.
Yeah.
Right? That was of
Huge.
incredible value. Absolutely.
Let's join together and thank Ted, Mike, and Sam for being here today. The conversation I heard was exactly what I was hoping to hear, that it's okay to do this innovative kind of activity, this innovative kind of research. It's a good thing. Sometimes things will fail. In my world, we want them to fail fast, so we quit spending money on them. We do have time for some questions. Does anybody have any questions for the Q&A portion?
Now the hard part starts.
Thank you. Could you, each of you, maybe give a short example about how the first industry partnership happened? Because I think some of the examples that you shared with us were about how they came back to you, or you built, or you decided I wanted to go with person B instead of A. But I'm just wondering about those first steps and how that happened for you.
Yeah, so for me, I wanted access to a molecule. It was an antisense molecule at the time, to test in an asthma model. And I was doing the mouse work, and so I approached the company, and they provided that. And we actually put in a joint grant to NCBC to do that work. And it was through that, and one of the conversations, they said, we're having this conversation with one of the animal CROs, and we just can't seem to find anybody that we really trust to do this monkey model. Would you consider doing that? So it was a slow, kind of trust building exercise. And then from there, it really was going to being at meetings, people seeing what we were doing, and walking up and listening to what other companies were doing and saying, I think we could test that for you. I think we could answer this question for you. And it just snowballed from there.
This is a great question about getting started. My story was that I kept seeing these patients with the same problem over and over. So I wrote a one-pager to whatever company I could find, which was the biggest one, and I sent them this note. I sent them this one-pager and said, I don't know how many patients have this problem, but I keep seeing it. And it wasn't known. But there's clearly something I'm seeing consistently. We sent them this one-pager, never heard back for a year, and then on a Thursday afternoon I got a call and they said, we've got your proposal. I didn't even remember hardly having sent it. And they said, can you be in Minneapolis on Monday? Which is like, I was in Florida at the time, so that's like Siberia. And they said, can you be here Monday? This was a Thursday. And give a talk to everyone in the company. I mean, it was some unbelievable situation. So I said, sure, I'll be there, because I was at that point like, you've been waiting for this a year, I'll be there. And sure enough, I go up there, and it was exactly as they said it would be. All these people are standing there saying, asking the question, do we have a problem? So it was an elementary type question relative to the things we're doing now, but it started with, maybe you have a problem and maybe you'd want to solve it, and maybe I'd be the person to help you solve it, and started from there. And it was a very slow process until it got started, and then it's been very fast. And we've had a relationship now for about 20 years with most of the major companies that make pacemakers and defibrillators as a result, because they go to meetings and see this one work and they say, oh, that's the same problem we're having with a similar device. And it's so industry can see the generalization of the solution faster than even I could, because there were other disease states that I hadn't even thought of, that they said that's the same problem we have over here with a deep brain stimulator or devices for other kinds of diseases. But I think it often starts with just a connection to somebody with a shared desire to solve a problem.
I'd build on Sam's point and go back to his point of humble and hungry. For our office, it usually starts with a very simple conversation. You know, we are the university, but we're not here to help. Taking that stance, whether it's with a community partner, or a military industry partner, and just venturing out and saying, you know, we'd just love to know what your needs are. Just trying to extract that information in an organized way. It certainly means you got to be prepared from a customer service standpoint to put your foot forward first, to pay it forward with some investment that you can afford, that you might not get compensated for. But I'll give two quick examples. Wayne Godwin has worked a lot with our gaming industry partners here in the state, and we went out and said, look, you know, we'd love to play with you. That's what it comes down to. What do you need? And how do we get through this cycle of what do you need, what do you got? And it was amazing what we heard. One of their first responses was, you know, we need this type of infrastructure in the state because we're sending a lot of business to California, and we'd rather keep that economic activity here. Well, what if we bought that equipment? Would you come and hire us to use it? Absolutely. Similar point came from a workforce perspective. You know what? We want to hire creative talent. We're tired of hiring non-North Carolina kids. We hire kids from LA, we hire them from Boston, they come with an attitude. A year later we fire them, you know, lo and behold, you're not too good to work in North Carolina. Or, yeah, you are now, bye. So we get a lot of that from a workforce perspective. Jim Menke's work with our military partners is another example. You get a call and they say, you know, we know you have a laboratory for simulated blast injury. We have some people complaining from a workforce occupational safety perspective that when they're down on the firing range all day, they don't feel good. So, you know, investing 2 or 3 days to take your equipment down and strap them on some Marines as they shoot off anti-tank, you know, bazookas is time well spent. So I think if you're hungry and humble and you go out and you just you know, let people know I'm not here with the answers, but I'd sure love to collaborate with you on developing answers to problems you have. You will be amazed at the people that will flock to you to talk about how that could happen.
And you have to be a good listener.
You do.
You've got to really listen for what they're asking for and not try to shoehorn what you want into the conversation. You really need to listen to what they need.
Well, in all honesty, don't go wanting anything.
Yeah.
I mean, the easiest way to do what Mike said is do not go wanting anything other than to truly in your heart hear what their challenges are.
Good points.
Any other questions?
Based on my own experience too, many times we can kill our own ideas because we are afraid to share it with other industry, or bringing in a colleague to collaborate because they may steal the idea, and we end up not going very far with it. And that's actually a very serious issue that can actually sabotage our own innovation and so on. So I would like you to share with us, how do you overcome this fear of sharing and collaborating, because that's what we need to be really successful with bringing our idea to the real world.
That's a tremendous point. I think I've got more work by telling people that, you know, that maybe they should go somewhere else to do it. Just being very honest, that here's what we can offer, but here's what, you know, here's what Charles Rivers can offer you. And here's what UC Davis can offer you. And if you want us to be involved, we'll be glad to go over there and help mediate that for you and make the introductions. But it's that sort of honesty of what we can do, what others can do, that really, I think, brings people to you to work. The other thing is to recognize that, you know, very few of our ideas are so stellar that someone else is going to steal them and be successful and you're not going to be. I mean, a lot of universities are thinking about giving up intellectual property to companies, right? Because there's so few projects that lead to significant intellectual property, right? That you're better off getting the collaborations and doing the work and benefiting from that.
I mean, that goes to that point of execution. Right.
If you can find somebody that can execute it better than I can, you should go do that.
Well, I'm saying this based on actually my own experience when I had my own company to bring my idea to the market. And I kept getting the message back and forth from small business grants application that they wanted me to work with people from the university. And I can't get people to work because unless they wanted to have some documentation of sharing the profit and so on. And at the end result, they got nothing, I got nothing. So, because people had to be more open with good intention, and before they really make money, they were thinking that just wanted to use them. And so the point I wanted to share, I think we need to be more open and bring our ideas to the real world rather than digging a hole and putting it in. Nobody's going to make use of it.
Agreed.
Yeah, my comment about that too is that it may be naive, but I never really worry about the exclusivity of an idea. In fact, I have a saying, I say, well, if you steal that idea, I'll just make some more, and the next ones will be better. I mean, and the only reason I say that is not to be cocky, but to remind myself, hey, I'd rather trust and get half of something than not trust and get half of nothing. Yeah, I mean the idea, and that's what you made that point. So I usually try to just self-soothe by saying, you know what, if this idea is so great, somebody else has probably had it, and if they steal it or do something with it that's untoward, we'll just have to come up with a better one.
And I think a lot of times the people that are of the mind to take someone else's idea are not the ones that have the stamina and perseverance to actually execute on them, ultimately anyway.
I invite you to, for those who have more questions, to stay later, stay afterwards and talk with them and pose your questions, because I think we've had a great dialogue here. I want to thank each of our speakers. Please join me in thanking them.